"You will not keep that baby in this house," my mother said. She said it in front of my father, in front of the kitchen table, in front of the life I still thought was mine. My father did not lower his newspaper. He said, "You already embarrassed us enough." I asked, "Are you really saying this now?" My mother picked up my folded scrubs from the chair. She put them into a black trash bag. She did not blink. My father said, "Brennan gave you a way out. You refused it." I waited for one of them to stop, for one of them to say I could stay, for one of them to remember I was their daughter. My mother tied the bag closed. The plastic snapped tight. That was the answer. I understood something then. I was already outside the family. They were only making it official. If you have ever heard the words, "This is for your own good," stay with me. My name is Jessica Carter. I was 27 then. I lived in Morgantown, West Virginia. I was the first person in my family to finish college. I became a nurse. My parents liked that when it made them look successful. They liked telling people I worked long shifts. They liked saying I had discipline. They liked the version of me that reflected well on them. They did not like the version that made her own decisions. I met Brennan Sullivan at a hospital charity event. He sold pharmaceuticals. He was polished, rich, and careful with his image. He sent flowers to my apartment. He took me to quiet restaurants. He always knew what to say in public. He said he loved that I worked hard. He said I was different. He said he wanted something serious. But for more than a year, I never met his family. There was always a reason. His father was busy. His mother was tired. The timing was never right. I noticed it. I asked about it. He always had an answer ready. After 14 months, I found out I was pregnant. I told Brennan in his car after my shift. Rain hit the windshield. He kept both hands on the wheel while I talked. He said, "I need time to think." Then he disappeared. He stopped answering calls. He stopped replying to texts. He stopped appearing outside the hospital. A man I saw almost every day became silence. 3 weeks later, he came back. He brought a check for $15,000. He also brought a confidentiality agreement. He said he wanted to simplify a difficult situation. I remember that line exactly. We sat at my small kitchen table. The heater clicked on and off. He pushed the papers toward me. I asked, "Are you paying me to disappear?" He said, "Jessica, don't make this uglier than it has to be." I tore the check in half. Then again, I left the contract on the table. I said, "My child is not something you buy." He stood up slowly. He looked offended. That part still stays with me. Not because it was dramatic, because it was clean. He thought this was a transaction. I answered as if it was a life. When I told my parents, they blamed me immediately. My mother said, "You should have handled this quietly." My father said, "A smart girl would have taken the money." I said, "He wanted me to sign away the truth." My mother folded a dish towel. Then she folded it again. She said, "Sometimes the truth ruins futures." For the next 2 weeks, the house changed around me. My mother stopped asking if I had eaten. My father spoke only when necessary. The hallway felt narrower. Every room felt borrowed. I kept working. I kept saving money. I kept telling myself they needed time. Then February came hard. I was 6 months pregnant when the snow started. That night, I came home and found my things in trash bags. Not packed carefully. Not boxed. Thrown together. Boots with books. Towels with photo albums. My nursing textbooks bent at the corners. My father stood by the door. My mother held my coat over one arm. She said, "You cannot stay here anymore." I asked, "Tonight?" My father said, "Especially tonight. Maybe now you understand consequences." I looked at the living room, at the lamp I studied under, at the family photos still on the wall. I said, "Where am I supposed to go?" My mother handed me the coat. She said, "That is not our problem now." No one raised a voice. That made it worse. I carried the bags through the snow. My hands hurt. The driveway was half ice. When I closed the trunk, I stood there for a second. The porch light was on. No one came outside. I called my brother, Russell Carter. Russell was a former Marine. He lived in an old trailer outside town. My parents always talked about him like a disappointment. He had PTSD. That was enough for them to keep him at a distance. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Can I come over?" He said, Yes. At the trailer, he opened the door before I knocked. He looked at my face, then at the bags, then at my stomach. He stepped aside and said, "You're safe here." He did not ask what I had done. He did not tell me what I should have done. He did not make me earn help. He took the heavier bags first. A chair scraped as he cleared space. The trailer smelled like coffee and old heat. He pointed to the bedroom. He said, "You take that room." I said, "It's yours." He shrugged. "I'll sleep out here." That was the first decent thing anyone had done for me in weeks. I sat on the bed and took off my boots. Russell brought me a blanket without looking directly at me. He said, "We'll figure it out tomorrow." That word mattered. We. By 3 a.m, the heater was rattling. I woke up and remembered where I was. That was the first crack. Not in my life. In the story my parents told about family, if you know what it feels like to be judged before you are helped, keep listening. The next morning, Russell made coffee in silence. He set a mug near me and did not ask for explanations. The trailer was small. 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, a living area with a worn couch. It was old. It was poor. It was the first place that felt honest. Russell left early for work. Before he walked out, he wrote 2 things on a notepad. Eat. Lock the door. That was his style. No speech. No pity. Just protection. I kept working my shifts at the hospital. I still wore the same scrubs. I still smiled at patients. I still finished every task in front of me. On the outside, I looked stable. Inside, everything had shifted. I was pregnant. I had been thrown out. The father of my child had tried to buy silence, and my parents acted as if I had caused the damage. Some days I asked myself the question they wanted. Was I overreacting? I asked it while folding laundry in the trailer. I asked it driving home after late shifts. I asked it when I felt the baby move at night. Then I would hear my father again. A smart girl would have taken the money. That sentence stayed in the room even when he was not there. If you have ever doubted your own memory because family kept repeating their version, stay with me. I called my mother once after I moved out. She answered on the 4th ring. I could hear television behind her. I said, "Are you really done with me?" She said, "Jessica, stop making this harder than it already is." I asked, "Harder for who?" She ignored that. She said, "You are emotional right now. Later you will understand we were protecting your future." "Protecting your future," I said. "By throwing me out in the snow?" She said. "By forcing you to face reality." I remember staring at the window while she spoke. There was frost in one corner. A truck passed outside. I wanted her to hear herself. She did not. My father never called. Russell asked only once if I had spoken to them. I said yes. He nodded and changed the subject. That also mattered. He was not trying to manage my feelings. He was letting me see them clearly. Money became tight immediately. I paid what I could for groceries. Russell worked longer hours. The trailer had leaks. Some nights the cold came through the walls. He still gave me the bedroom. I told him I could take the couch. He always said no. I asked, "Why are you doing this?" He stood at the sink and said, "Because someone should." 3 months later, my daughter was born. Harper came into the world small, loud, and determined. When the nurse placed her on my chest, the room finally felt quiet. Russell came later with grocery store flowers. He stood near the bed and looked at her carefully. Then he said, "She looks angry already." That made me laugh. I needed that. Brennan did not come. He did not call. He did not send anything. My parents knew I had delivered. They still stayed away. I had thought they might appear once the baby was real, once there was a face, once there was a child to hold. They did not. So Harper and I went home to Russell's trailer. It was cramped. Her crib barely fit in the bedroom. Bottles dried on a towel near the sink. Diapers were stacked in a plastic drawer. Nothing looked polished. Everything mattered. At night, Russell kept the television low while I rocked Harper. Sometimes he walked the floor with her when I had not slept. He never called it helping. He just did it. My parents had always said Russell was the burden. That line became impossible to believe. He was tired, but steady. He startled sometimes at loud sounds. Some nights he barely slept. but he never made Harper feel unsafe. He never made me feel like a mistake. Months passed. Then a year. Then another. Brennan remained absent for 3 full years. He did not visit. He did not pay support. He did not ask for photos. He did not ask how Harper was doing. It was not confusion. It was a choice. I built a routine anyway. I worked. I raised Harper. I learned which bills had to be paid first. I learned how to function on little sleep. Russell worked himself flat. I saw it in the way he sat after dinner, in the way he rubbed the back of his neck, in the way his boots stayed on until the last minute. Still, he made room for us. Then came the day Harper nearly died. She had a severe peanut allergy reaction. It happened fast. One moment she was fine. The next, she was struggling. I knew the signs. That did not make me calm. Russell moved first. He grabbed the keys. He carried her to the car. His hands shook, but his actions stayed clear. Later, when she was safe, I learned what he had done. He sold our grandfather's memorial gun to cover the emergency medication. That gun was one of the few things he had kept with pride. He sold it without hesitation. I said, "You should have told me first." He looked at Harper sleeping and said, "There wasn't time." That moment settled everything for me. My parents had thrown out their pregnant daughter. Brennan had tried to buy his way clean. Russell sold the last valuable thing he owned to keep Harper alive. I stopped asking if I was overreacting after that. Some questions answer themselves if you wait long enough. At night, after Harper slept, I would think about my mother's phrase, "For your future." I had heard it all my life. About school, about rules, about who to date, about what to hide. It always meant the same thing. Obey now. Understand later. But later had arrived, and their version still looked cruel. By then, Harper was evidence. Evidence that life could begin in shame, according to other people, and still become decent. Evidence that love and money were not the same thing. Evidence that my parents had been wrong. And that was when I understood the worst part. They had trained me to doubt the people who stayed and excuse the people who left. If that pattern feels familiar, keep listening. Harper was 3 when Brennan finally came back. Not because he missed her. Not because guilt found him. His father died and left a multi-million-dollar estate. The will had one condition. Brennan had to acknowledge and support all of his children. That was when we became visible. I did not hear it from Brennan first. I heard it from his family. A black SUV pulled up outside Russell's trailer one afternoon. Harper was inside coloring at the table. Russell looked through the window and said, "You expecting company?" I said no. 2 people stepped out. An older woman in a wool coat. A man in a dark suit carrying a leather folder. Even before they reached the door, I knew. Money announces itself in small ways. Shoes without dirt. Voices lowered on purpose. A face that expects access. Russell opened the door but did not invite them in. The woman said, "I'm Brennan's mother." She looked past him, then at me, then at the trailer. The man introduced himself as representing family interests. I do not remember his name. I remember the tone. Polite, measured, certain. Russell moved aside only after I said it was fine. They came in carefully. Harper looked up from her crayons and pressed closer to my leg. Brennan's mother smiled at her. It was the kind of smile used in photographs. Then she looked at me and said, "We should discuss what is best for the child." There it was. Not hello. Not apology. Just a sentence about what was best. I had heard that language before. It usually meant someone richer wanted control. If you have ever watched people suddenly discover family when money entered the room, stay with me. The man opened the folder. He spoke about opportunity. Private schools. A trust fund. A stable future. Travel. Connections. He did not ask who tucked Harper in at night. He asked what arrangement I would consider. I said, "You mean how much money it takes?" He smiled without warmth. He said, "No one is trying to offend you." That sentence almost always means the opposite. Brennan's mother sat down and looked around once. She said, "Harper deserves more than this." Russell leaned against the counter. He said, "She has food, safety, and people who stayed." The woman ignored him. She said, "No one is saying you failed. But surely you understand a child should have every advantage. I said, she should have had a father. The room went still. The man closed the folder partway. Brennan's mother looked down for the first time. Then she said, Brennan was young. I said, he was old enough to disappear. He was old enough to draft papers. Harper tugged my sleeve and asked for juice. I poured it while they waited. The refrigerator hummed behind us. Then the man said, we are hoping to establish shared custody in a cooperative spirit. There it was. The real purpose. Not regret, not reunion. Legal access attached to inheritance. I said, Brennan has never met her. The man replied, that can change. I said, for the will? He did not answer. Russell closed a cabinet too hard. Harper looked up, then back at her crayons. Brennan's mother softened her voice. It sounded practiced. She said, Jessica, don't let pride deny your daughter a better life. Better. That word again. My parents used it. Brennan used it. Now his mother used it. Better always meant wealth, silence, and obedience. To me, better meant Harper sleeping safely. Better meant medicine paid for somehow. Better meant a man giving up his only bedroom without questions. I said, you are describing a richer life, not a better one. The woman pressed her lips together. The man slid a paper across the table. A proposed agreement. I did not touch it. I said, take that back. He said, you should at least review it. I said, no. Russell stepped forward. His voice stayed low. He said, she said no. The man looked at Russell as if he were furniture that had spoken. That was his mistake. Because Russell had spent 3 years proving what family looked like. He did not need their approval. He only needed the door. Brennan's mother rose slowly. She said, we hoped to do this privately. I said, so did Brennan 3 years ago. That landed. I saw it in her face. She picked up the paper. The man gathered the folder. Neither apologized. At the door, Brennan's mother looked once more at Harper. She said, she deserves options. I said, she deserves honesty. Then they left. The SUV backed out slowly. Russell watched through the window until it disappeared. When he turned back, he said, you okay? I said, no, I'm clear. The next week, Brennan called for the first time in years. I almost let it ring out. Then I answered. He said, I know this is awkward. Not I'm sorry. Not I should have been there. Awkward, I said. You disappeared for 3 years. He exhaled into the phone. Then he used the same calm voice he always used in public. He said, I made mistakes. I want to do the right thing now. I asked, because your father died? Silence. Then he said, I want to be part of Harper's life. I looked at Harper on the floor, lining up crayons by color. I said, you want legal recognition because it releases money. He said, that's not fair. I said, neither was handing me a check. He tried another approach. Softer, more personal. He said, you always saw the worst in complicated situations. That line stopped me for a second. Not because it was clever, because it was familiar. My parents said I was emotional. Brennan said I was making things ugly. Now he said I saw the worst. Different words. Same work. Move the blame. Blur the damage. Make me explain what was obvious. I said, you do not get to rewrite those years. He said, Jessica, be reasonable. I ended the call. After that, letters started coming. Meeting requests. Formal language. Proposals about visitation and structure. Everything arrived clean. Everything arrived late. I felt anger without heat, because Harper was now old enough to understand presence, old enough to ask where people had been. And I was done offering soft answers to protect adults from their choices. That was my breaking point. Not loud, not dramatic, just clean. If you have ever watched absent people return with polished words and hidden motives, stay with me. Once Brennan's family understood I would not sign anything quietly, they filed in court. That part did not surprise me. People who are used to getting their way often call pressure procedure. The hearing date came faster than I expected. By then, Harper was old enough to ask why I was dressing carefully on a weekday. I told her, I have to take care of grown-up business. She accepted that. Children accept more than they should. Russell drove me to the courthouse. The sky was low and gray. He kept both hands on the wheel and said very little. That helped. I did not need a speech. I just needed someone beside me who understood silence. At a red light, Russell asked, "You sure you want me in there?" I said, "Yes." He nodded once. That was enough. The courthouse looked exactly how these places always look. Clean floors, hard benches, people pretending not to stare at one another. Brennan was already there when we arrived. He wore a navy suit. His hair was neat. He looked prepared for a business lunch. His mother sat 2 seats away from him. The same wool coat, the same careful posture. He stood when he saw me. He said, "Jessica." I said, "Brennan." He glanced at Russell. Russell did not offer a hand. There was an awkward pause. A chair scraped somewhere behind us. Then Brennan said, "This doesn't have to be hostile." I said, "It started hostile when you disappeared." His mother looked down at her lap. No one corrected me. If you have ever sat across from people who created the problem and then complained about the tension, stay with me. Inside the courtroom, everything felt smaller than I expected. No one was shouting. No one was performing. That mattered to me. I did not want a scene. I wanted a record. Brennan's lawyer spoke first. He talked about financial security. He talked about educational opportunity. He talked about the importance of a father's presence. That last part was hard to hear. Presence was not a future promise. It was a past action, and Brennan had none to show. Still, the lawyer kept going. Private schools, healthcare, structured visitation, a child's right to benefit from a larger family network. It all sounded polished. It all sounded expensive. It also sounded late. Then my lawyer stood. He did not speak for long. He said, "This is not a story about money. It is a story about who stayed." That was the cleanest sentence in the room. He laid out the years Brennan had missed. No visits, no support, no calls, no effort. He laid out the offer Brennan made when I was pregnant. The $15,000 check, the confidentiality agreement. He laid out what happened after. My parents threw me out at 6 months pregnant. Russell took me in. Russell gave up his bedroom. Russell helped raise Harper. Russell sold our grandfather's memorial gun when Harper needed emergency medication. No one interrupted those facts. No one could. Brennan's lawyer tried to shift the frame. He said people mature. He said families change. He said it was better to build cooperation than dwell on old pain. Old pain. That phrase almost irritated me more than anything else. Because neglect becomes old very quickly to the people who caused it. To the people who lived through it, it becomes structure. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and kept my hands still. I said Brennan had every chance to be a father before money required it. I said Harper was not a condition in a will. I said I would not hand my daughter to strangers because they arrived with resources 3 years late. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not try to sound noble. I just told the truth. Brennan watched me the whole time. He looked uncomfortable. That was not my concern. Then he spoke. He said he had been young. He said he had been overwhelmed. He said he wanted the chance to make things right now. The judge asked, "What efforts did you make during the first 3 years of the child's life?" That was the right question. Brennan shifted. He mentioned uncertainty. He mentioned tension. He mentioned not knowing how I would respond. The judge asked, "Did you provide support?" Brennan said no. "Did you seek visitation?" No. "Did you attempt contact?" He looked briefly at his lawyer before saying no again. That was the moment the room changed. Not dramatically, quietly. The facts stopped sounding like conflict. They started sounding like record. Then Brennan's lawyer tried one last line. He said, "My client can offer the child a significantly better life." Better. That word again, my lawyer replied before I could. He said, "A better life for whom?" There was a short silence after that. Someone shifted in the back row. A pen clicked once. The judge looked at Brennan, then at me, then at the paperwork. When the decision came, it was direct. I was granted full custody of Harper. Brennan was allowed supervised visitation only. He was ordered to pay child support, including support for the 3 years he had already abandoned. I did not react immediately. I wanted to hear every word clearly. Full custody. Supervised visitation. Support owed. Brennan looked forward and did not move. His mother closed her eyes for a moment. Russell sat beside me without saying anything. I could feel the release in him anyway. Outside the courtroom, Brennan tried to stop me. He said, "Jessica, can we at least talk?" I turned and looked at him. This time, I did not see the man from the restaurants. I saw a man surprised that consequences had shape. I said, "We just did." Then I walked away. That was not revenge. It was a boundary. For years, people kept asking me to be flexible, to be reasonable, to understand pressure, fear, timing, and future. What they meant was simple: make room for the people who hurt you. Again, I was done with that. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, Russell lit a cigarette, then looked at me and put it away unopened. He said, "Harper wants pancakes tonight." I said, "Good." That was our celebration. Not triumph. Pancakes. If you have ever had to become clear because everyone around you preferred you confused, keep listening. If you have ever rebuilt your life so quietly that the people who hurt you never understood what they lost, stay with me. After court, nothing changed overnight. That was part of the relief. There was no dramatic apology, no sudden warmth from people who had been cold on purpose. Life stayed ordinary. And ordinary felt earned. We drove home from the courthouse and stopped for pancakes. Harper talked about syrup and cartoons. Russell asked if she wanted bacon. That was the whole evening. No one said victory. No one said justice. Harper laughed when the syrup bottle made a rude noise. I remember that more clearly than the judge's voice. Because peace rarely arrives as a speech. It arrives as a normal evening that no one ruins. Brennan began supervised visits after the order. I followed the rules. I kept everything clear. I did not interfere. I also did not help him build what he had refused to build on time. That was his work, not mine. The first visit took place in a room that smelled faintly of disinfectant. There were toys in one corner. A clock hung too high on the wall. Harper stayed close to me at first, then close to the table, then close to her own caution. Brennan tried to sound warm. He asked about school. He asked about favorite colors. He asked the kind of questions men ask when they want to skip the years in between. Harper answered politely. Children can be astonishingly polite with strangers. At one point, she looked at me, and then back at him. She asked, "Where were you before?" He went still. There was no good answer. Only true ones and false ones. He said, "I wasn't here when I should have been." That was the first honest thing I heard from him in years. Harper accepted it for the moment because she was still small, but I knew that question would return as she grew. And when it did, I planned to answer it truthfully, not cruelly, not dramatically, truthfully. My parents reached out after the court decision. Not before, after. My mother called first. I let it ring once, then answered. She said, "We heard about the ruling." I said, "I assumed you would." There was a pause. Then she said, "Maybe now things can settle down." That was her instinct even then. Not, "I was wrong." Not, "We failed you." Settle down. I said, "Things were settled long before court." She did not like that. She said, "Jessica, families should not stay divided forever." I looked around the trailer while she spoke. Harper was in the other room singing to herself. Russell was outside working on the steps. I said, "Families should not throw out pregnant daughters either." Silence. Then my mother said, "We did what we thought was necessary for your future." There it was again. Even now. Even after everything. For your future. I said, "You were never protecting my future. You were protecting your comfort." She inhaled sharply. Then she said, "You are still angry." I said, "No. I'm clear." That line mattered, because it was true. Anger burns hot. Clarity does not. Clarity sits still and leaves the door closed. My father never called me directly. He sent one short message through my mother. "Tell Jessica she is being stubborn." That sounded exactly like him. I did not respond. That was new for me. Before, I would have explained. I would have argued details and tried to win fairness from people who had no use for it. Now I understood something simple. Not every silence is weakness. Some silences are structure. I set boundaries cleanly. My parents were not invited into Harper's life. Not because I wanted punishment, because trust had already been tested and failed. They did not get access through biology alone. They did not get a role because time had passed. That decision upset other people more than it upset me. There are always people who prefer reunion as a performance. It makes everyone else comfortable. Distance makes people ask questions. Distance reminds them that harm has shape. I was fine with that. Meanwhile, life in the trailer kept moving. I worked my shifts. Harper grew. Russell kept pretending he was less soft than he really was. He taught Harper how to plant tomatoes in chipped buckets by the steps. She followed him carrying a plastic shovel twice too big for her hands. In the evenings, she climbed into his lap with picture books. He cleared his throat first, like reading aloud offended him. Then he read every page. That was family, not the expensive version, the reliable one. As Harper got older, I became less ashamed of how we had started. For a while, I had carried the story like evidence against myself. Pregnant, unmarried, thrown out, living in a trailer, depending on a brother my parents treated like a burden. But time rearranged that story. I was a nurse. I worked. I stayed. I raised my daughter with the man who had shown up when everyone else had stepped back. That was not failure. That was reconstruction. 3 years earlier, my parents said I had ruined my life. They were wrong. I had lost their approval. That was not the same as losing my future. The future they wanted for me was built on obedience. The one I built was smaller, harder, and real. And real turned out to be enough. The day my parents put my belongings into trash bags, they thought they were ending something. They were, just not what they imagined. They ended their authority over me. They ended the version of me that kept begging to be understood. What remained was simpler. A trailer, a brother, a child, work, bills, protection, truth. That was enough to build from. It is still enough. When I think about family now, I do not think about who shares my name. I think about who opened the door when the rest of the world closed it. For me, that answer never changed. It was Russell, and the life my parents said I had destroyed. I built it back from nothing. Then I protected it. Quietly. Completely. For good.